Well, good afternoon or morning, everyone, depending on where you may be located today. John and I are privileged to have this opportunity to share with you about a very important topic on the area of life safety. But before we begin, we just thought we would remind everyone that September is National Preparedness Month. And this is a special month that focuses on organizational preparedness across the United States. And we would invite you to go to the FEMA website at ready.gov and see all of the helpful resources that FEMA has put together and other governmental agencies on how you can be prepared for numerous types of emergencies that we can have happen to us at any time. So let's look at a specific type of exposure today, and that is the valuable assets where we have residential facilities within our church. Many of us have spent years of our lives living in a dormitory, such as Meyer Hall on the campus of Andrews University, where I was a student for 4 years. Or maybe we've attended a special ministerial conference at a facility like Cohutta Springs in Georgia, which has a very large lodge, which is sort of like a hotel facility for the attendees. And many of us also have spent many a special summer at camp, or during a Bible conference, or during a Pathfinder campout. And we've used the facilities of cabins or other types of camp-related facilities for residential purposes. All of these are valuable assets to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But are they, John, really the most important asset that the church has to protect?
No, obviously we can always replace property, but what we cannot replace is lives. And people are our most valuable asset. You know, we're concerned with the safety of our children that are there at the facilities. We're concerned with the safety of our employees, the volunteers, and everyone who comes into our schools or our camps.
And especially, John, we're really concerned about the safety of the dormitory students.
In particularly.
The dormitory students who really, this is their home on campus for several months out of the year. And they become very comfortable in their dorm rooms as to the type of activities that they have in their rooms or within the dormitory, which really makes life safety a true high priority for all of our schools that have dormitories on their campuses. But whatever the operation that the church has, if there's a residential facility at that organization, life safety always must be that organization's highest priority.
And it is one of those exposures, Arthur, as we've discussed many times, where we have a potential for massive injuries and life loss because of the number of people who are in those facilities.
A fire can hit at any time. It can hit our church just like it can hit other organizations around the world. On the screen is a picture of what took place on Sunday morning, November 16th, 2008, when the offices of our British Union Conference in Watford, England, were destroyed by fire. Fortunately, that day, there was nobody in the building at the time of the fire. But we know that when we have residential property and facilities, people are often there 24/7 inside the building, which really tells us why we must be prepared. And for that reason, the denominational working policy S6050, which is the same reference policy in either the General Conference Working Policy Book or the North American Division policy books, talk about the importance of having fire protection in denominational buildings and what denominational organizations must do to prepare for these types of unexpected fire losses and how to prevent the loss of life or personal injury by making that their highest priority. So I would recommend to all of us that we take the time to review what denominational working policy says as it's found in S6050 as a minimum standard of what is going to be required from the life safety viewpoint. But if we look at dormitories in particular, there are some very good statistics kept by the National Fire Protection Association here in the United States. And what you see on the screen right now are the loss statistics for the years 2007 through 2011 in dormitories on campuses that have residential type building, that have had residential type building fires. So John, this wouldn't really be any fire on a campus. This would be a fire specifically in a residential facility that was on that campus. And the statistics are rather alarming. 3,810 structural fires on average each year. 2 deaths. So 2 students have been lost each year. 30 civilian injuries on average, with over $9 million in property damage. But now, here's the 2 facts that I think we need to make everyone aware of. 84% of these fires were caused by some type of a cooking activity that usually was left unattended. And you know, so that could be anything from making popcorn in a microwave to using a hot plate in your room or in the room down in the lobby area. Something related to a cooking activity was the cause of the vast majority of all these fires. And so I think those who are responsible for our dormitories need to keep this closely in mind as they look at the activities that take place. And you know, the other thing, they usually happen at night. Now that would be expected, that it would happen at night, because that's usually when the most residents are within the facility and engaged in all types of normal living type activities. And so I think this gives us a little bit of background of what we're going to be focusing on today. Now, John, have we ever had a real serious dormitory fire within the Adventist Church?
And indeed we have, Arthur. And let's think about for a moment April 26th of 2005. I want to take us to Southern Adventist University. It was about 3:30 a.m. in Thatcher Hall, which is the women's dorm. And an accidental fire began in the couch that was on the 3rd floor lobby area. Now, there were 574 residents living in that dormitory. And the dormitory itself actually met all Tennessee fire safety codes. It had a central fire alarm system, and each room had smoke detectors in it. The one thing the dormitory did not have is it didn't have a sprinkler system. The fire drills were practiced in the evening of each semester.
Now, John, some may say, well, if it would have had a fire sprinkler system, it would have been different. Should it have had a fire sprinkler system? Was that required by any of the codes?
Codes at that time did not require it, and some codes still don't require sprinklers in buildings. But we're seeing a tendency for more and more local jurisdictions to start, even fire marshals to come in and say they want to see, for various reasons, sprinkler systems in dormitories. So we are seeing a tendency for a push to do that legislatively and through other sources. But at that time, it was not required.
So at that moment in time, this was a textbook case of a well-prepared dormitory facility.
That is correct, yes.
And what happened after the alarm sounded?
Well, that's the unfortunate part, because in the end, Most people evacuated, but unfortunately we had one female student who died in the fire, and two others that were treated for smoke inhalation at a local hospital and later released. There was a lot of good things about that dormitory that fortunately made it safer for everybody, and I'm not sure, she went back, as I recall, she went back to her room to get something, I don't know what it was, and ultimately was killed in the fire. But there was some really good separation as between those sections of where that dormitory fire was and the next section. The doors and everything, there was a little bit of smoke seep through, and you could see the smoke imprint on walls and things, but just a small amount. It didn't affect much of anything on the opposite side of that firewall. So this was a very well done and very well built dormitory, and met a lot of the codes. But even though those codes are met, you know, and even though we plan drills, things can go awry, and unfortunately we end up with a tragedy on our hands.
You know, John, as I've read some of the reports regarding this fire, to me it is really amazing when you see, even with the firewalls in place and the separation, how much damage that 3 stories of the building sustained in the fire. And the local fire marshal was asked by the news media after the fire investigation was completed, would sprinkler systems have made a difference in this loss of life? And his answer was very specific. He said no, because sprinkler systems are designed to protect the building. Smoke is what caused the death. The student who died in this tragic fire was overcome by the fumes, the toxic fumes, because she tried to return instead of just exiting out of the building, which I think is really the key lesson for all of us to learn, that maybe the damage would have been less to the building if there were sprinklers, but if the exit drills had been followed as outlined by the university, this student would still be with us today.
Right.
Well, you know, we've had other dormitory fires as well. I wanted to share a story that took place, 4 or 5 years ago. I remember sitting here in my office, and a call came in from one of our account executives who reported to me that the girls' dormitory at Auburn Adventist Academy was on fire. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And the good news there was there weren't many students in the dormitory at that time, and all the students and the staff members got out, and the building was a total loss. However, there was no loss of life in that situation. I had the responsibility to notify the president of Adventist Risk Management, who was traveling overseas at that particular moment in time. So I got on the phone to call Rob Sweezy, our president, who was at one of our universities overseas. And when I told him what had taken place, he told me he had just been meeting with university officials earlier that afternoon about the life safety in their dormitories, because every door, both the main doors and the fire exit doors in those dormitories, were locked shut with no way to get out unless you had a key for the lock. And here we had, at the same time he was dealing with that situation at one of our dormitories, a total fire loss at another one of our facilities. So that sort of really brought to my mind the importance of life safety in these residential buildings at all times, anywhere we have these facilities in the world, not just here in the United States or North America. So when that alarm sounds, the clock starts ticking.
It does.
And, you know, John, we say quite often that an organization has under 2 minutes to get that building evacuated. And what's so special about a 2-minute window to evacuate a building? I think we probably best could maybe try to illustrate this with a series of 3 slides, and then we'll sort of explain what's taking place in these slides. There are many fire safety laboratories that, in a controlled environment, can recreate a fire scenario. And I want to share with you these 3 pictures, and it will really emphasize why evacuation must be your first priority. When the alarm sounds, there is no time to wait to start evacuating the building. The other thing, we can never allow anyone to return once they've evacuated from the building until the local fire authorities say the all clear has been sounded. And we must not make any exceptions. There's nothing more valuable in the building than your life if you're outside of the building. And we need to have safety zones designated, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But let's look at these pictures. This is a recreation of a typical teenager's bedroom. You're going to find the typical bedding, clothes, computers, furniture, etc. in that room. And this particular fire started with a curling iron that was unplugged and then put on top of the bed sheets. And in approximately 58 seconds, you had a nice fire started on the top of that bed from the bed sheets, and you can start to see that the smoke is starting to billow up within the room. Now, John, at 1 minute 43 seconds, what's now taking place in this room?
Well, at 1 minute 43 seconds, your heat has built up so extreme that you're reaching very close to a full conflagration, but you're not quite there yet. But at the same time, you've reached a temperature probably of about 1,200 degrees, 1,200 degrees. So you can imagine that survival in that is very slim.
And not only the heat factor, John, but let's say if you were standing in the foreground of this picture in this room, look at the black smoke that is at the ceiling and quickly descending.
Yes, and what you don't see there is the amount of gases that are actually below that layer of smoke from all of the chemicals and things that are burning in there. So there's a lot of unseen there that's just as dangerous.
Now, John, this next picture is 32 seconds later.
And here you have flashover. Once this point is reached, the whole room is engulfed in flame. There's nothing's going to survive that. 2 minutes and 15 seconds is all that there to work with. So you can see why the push for trying to get out of a building within 2 minutes.
And of course, if there had been a smoke alarm in this room, it would have triggered in less than the first 50 seconds of the fire. And if that smoke alarm was tied to the central alarm system of the building, it would have made aware the entire facility that a fire was taking place somewhere within that structure that could have initiated the immediate evacuation of the building.
Yes.
Now, John, one other thing about flashover. Even if that dorm room's door was closed, would there probably have been maybe enough force right there at flashover to blow right through that door?
I don't know that it would have blown through the door. You've got a certain amount of time that doors are made to withstand in a typical fire. And fire doors on dorm doors are usually rated for that. What's very important is that dorm room doors are actually spring-loaded or have mechanisms on there that make them self-closing. Because if a person is actually in there in the early stage of that fire and they go to leave that dorm room, they need to be sure that that door is going to close behind them so that it doesn't hamper the evacuation of other people in the dorm. And it will. I mean, all that smoke and everything just with an open door would instantly penetrate the hallway and create just a massive fire that way beyond control.
You know, John, as I've prepared for this, it's interesting. They say the second step is to notify and report the fire. You know, sometimes in the confusion of the emergency, people actually forget, if it's not a central alarm that rings automatically to a fire station,
They forget to pull the box.
they forget to pull the box, or they forget to make the call once they're safely outside of the building. So notifying fire services is critical, but also you need to know, what are your procedures on campus? Who do you notify within administration, campus security, or whoever, that there is this situation so that the campus's emergency plan can be activated. And if it's a large campus, or maybe at one of our camps, one little tip is have somebody designated who will go to the entrance of your campus to meet the first responders as they arrive, to give the directions to them so that they aren't wandering through campus trying to find out where the emergency is taking place. Now, what about fire extinguishers?
I always still find fire extinguishers are very important, very critical. You don't want anything to slow down your evacuation. That's got to take place immediately. But if a person has a very small fire, it's in a trash can, maybe it's an office copier that's starting to go into a meltdown, or a computer or something, it is extremely useful to be able to put that little tiny fire out and get the fire department in there, and they can do all the checking that they need to do before they let people back in the building. So I find it's very important to go ahead and try to put the fire out if it's small enough to be controlled by either smothering it, like in a kitchen fire, or an extinguisher. But then immediately you're still got everybody else going through the total evacuation of the building.
So, John, you would pull the alarm first before you tried to fight it.
I'd like to hope there's more than one person around, because I wouldn't want to run back in to do that fire. I'd like to hope there's more than one person so somebody can be trying to take care of that fire while somebody else is hitting that alarm. So two things are happening at the same time. Simultaneous goes a lot faster than trying to get down there, pull the alarm, get back to it. If that's what it came to, yes, I would evacuate first.
And I think the other thing that we'd want to stress here is, if you've been trained how to use a fire extinguisher, make sure you have an evac route out for yourself, and to close doors behind you as you go. To help contain the fire in one area to the best of your ability.
And in a typical dorm, technically all your doors should close behind you as you leave anyway. Mechanical room doors, any door that goes onto a corridor should be self-closing.
We talked about going to a designated safe area. And once you assemble your people in a safe zone, someone should determine if everybody is present and accounted for. And if there are any missing people, how do you identify who they are and never allow anybody to go back in to try to find them? It's interesting, when the fire department arrives, their first question is going to be, is everybody out of the building? Before they start to really attack the fire itself, they want to know, is everybody been out? And by having designated safe zones and taking a head count, you will be able to respond to the fire department either in the affirmative, or no, we're trying to find where these people are, or we know that there's still one or two or however many people are still trapped in the building. So having your designated safe zones and taking record should be a critical part of your program.
Yes.
And then practice drills. You can have the best designed emergency plan, but if you don't practice it and it just sits in a notebook, what good is it? Practice in the United States at most schools that have residential facilities, I believe, is quarterly by the fire safety codes. And usually they like that practice drill done at night, when the facility is the most filled with residents, so that they do have a real life experience. But I believe that probably our best counsel would be for every school and our camps to work with their local jurisdiction and their own local fire departments and invite them to come and observe one of your practice drills. That way they can help you design where your safe zones might be. They can see your facilities firsthand, and they can make comments and recommendations to you of how you could improve your drills, and also you would get the current standard of how often you should have drills for your specific location.
We were actually at a college doing a survey when they were getting ready to do their drills through their dormitories, and we provided some assistance in the fact that we actually went in and double-checked that all the rooms had been evacuated, and they hadn't. There were a couple times when somebody was just kind of hanging out in the room. It's like, this is a drill. You need to make sure everybody's out of those rooms in the drills, and that they understand the importance that the next time may not be a drill. You can't get lethargic and say, I'm going to stay here this time. Everybody needs to leave the building.
Yeah, you know, Don, even at the general conference office, when they have a fire drill, I've seen the general conference president going down 3 floors of stairs to the designated meeting zone for his area of the building. So really, there should be no exceptions on the compliance to the drill. It doesn't matter who you are. When that alarm sounds, you evacuate the building. Well, John, Advanced Risk Management has seen a lot of things in dormitories, lodges, and camps. And we thought that maybe it'd be good just to show some pictures of what we've seen, what's important, especially because we would encourage every facility to do their own self-inspection. And maybe by showing some of these pictures, we can give you a better idea of what you should be looking for in a self-inspection of your residential facilities.
Right.
First and foremost is the signage. There should be an evacuation map in every room that tells where is your evacuation route from that room. You know, this is standard practice in almost every hotel room around the world. There's an evacuation map. There's also signage in the halls, at the stairways. We should have the same thing in our facilities. Now, what about the key safety elements?
Obviously, there's other things. Once the, we obviously need a fire alarm system, some way to notify everybody that there is a fire taking place and that they need to evacuate. And the current ones now have the strobes, so if if you have hearing problems, that you detect through the strobe that there's an issue. Horns have to be at a certain level of sound, and all these things. Exit signage, proper exit signage, so that people can see their way out. And with when you have a nighttime fire taking place, how do you find your way out if you haven't got emergency lighting? It's very crucial that corridors are well lit and people can find their way out.
Arthur and John?
Yes.
Yeah.
We have a question. Back to the maps on the previous slide. The question was, at what level should these maps be positioned in the room? Is there a guide for that?
Normally, they're right on the back of
the back of the door, and they're about my eye level, but I don't have a measurement for that. And I'm not sure. I'd have to, that's something we'd have to look up on an NFPA code to see. Because I don't recall actually even seeing that measurement before, but I know that could be an issue with ADA where you have somebody, in a wheelchair. So,
Certainly.
But I've always seen them about eye level, and I've never seen it compensate in any way, even in hotel rooms for.
And the other thing that I would say about the maps that I've observed, they're usually fairly simple picture drawings.
And they say you are here, and they show like 2 ways out. You have to see 2 ways out on that map.
Yeah.
You know, even though we sometimes say, well, our dormitory students are there forever, when they first get there, they're almost transient. They have no idea where those exit doors are. And sometimes our dormitories are used for camp meetings and things. So we're bringing in a transient group. We may have sometimes a couple of rooms set aside for visitors. These are very important maps on the back of those doors. I'm sorry I don't have that measurement or whatever it is. I don't recall ever having seen it myself.
Okay. Any more you want to say?
The other thing I would mention here is sprinklers. It says must-have on this slide, and in a lot of cases, it's going to be required one of these days. They're a very important element. They do help to buy time, and many like I say, local legislations are starting to change and starting to require them. And depending on what that dormitory is used for, we have dorms that are multi-use dormitories, and those have been required to have it right away.
Now, smoke detectors.
Smoke detection is extremely critical. And you know what I'm finding, and we have a mix of things. We have dormitories, we have camps, we have little housing areas that we have on camp that people stay in. It's very crucial that every sleeping area have a smoke detector in it. In the old days, they used to put a smoke detector out in the corridor and consider that enough. But what happens when you're sleeping in that room and your door's closed and you have a candle or something electric goes bad and it starts a fire? It's crucial that the people in that room are alerted, and then as it spreads and the smoke hits the hallway, that people outside as well. So now we need to make sure that there's smoke detectors in the corridors and smoke detectors in the rooms are the best way to help protect yourself. And keep in mind, as far as detection, a lot of legislation is starting to enforce CO2 detection as well. We have, wherever we have a fossil fuel heating system or fossil fuel stoves, water heaters, that we start installing CO2 detectors as well.
And so John, we're saying every sleeping room needs a smoke detector.
Every sleeping room should have a smoke
detector.
yes,
So it doesn't even matter if it's the little cabin way out in the woods at one of our camps.
That is correct.
You know, John, the other thing, how are you going to get out? And, you know, I was just in a dormitory overseas where every window on the dormitory had security bars, and there wasn't a release mechanism to get out of those windows. Here are a couple of examples of fire escapes that you can put in and retrofit your buildings. The first one being a window escape system, and then the other one actually is a picture from one of our camps where from the second level they have built a ladder fire escape, which is very good for the organization to consider, because that is addressing the life safety issue of those residents who would be on the second floor. The other thing that really concerns us in residential facilities is if there's no panic hardware. Again, in one of the dormitories I was just in, they locked the door behind us when we entered the building. There was no panic hardware anywhere on any of the exit doors, and they were all locked with a key. There's a couple of ways, because we often hear that, well, the panic hardware makes it too easy for people to come in and out, or the panic hardware doesn't secure the door as well from people breaking in. So there are some ways we can address that. Number one, there are panic hardware alarms, that an alarm sounds when the panic bar is hit that opens that door. Or there are these wedge brackets that you can put in on the inside that makes the door more secure from people entering or trying to break into that door. But in the event of an emergency, the people who are trying to exit, they just lift the wedging, and away they can open the door.
Yeah, the normal procedure would be is when the building gets occupied, you go ahead and take that little wedge thing out. It doesn't require a key. While it's occupied, you remove that little bracket and go about doing your things.
Now, John, probably the number one thing we've seen anywhere,
For sure.
is a blocked egress. I mean, here's an exit door. Number one, there's no exit sign above the door. It does have operable panic hardware, which was a good point, but you would have really had to work to get a flow of people down that exit hall and out past the stacked chairs and the tables that were stored up against that exit door.
And in dormitories, we see a lot of times the things that end up blocking some of those corridors are decorative items or even bicycles.
Yeah. Now, what about this one? Here is a worship room in one of our dormitories with an exit, again, unmarked. It led immediately to the outside of the building, directly outside, and the door was locked with a deadbolt lock. So virtually that exit was unusable in the event of an emergency unless you had a key. And then the classic that we see all the time, a chain and padlock around the panic hardware on a exit door, which has not been removed when the building is occupied. John, I don't think we could count how many times we've seen that picture repeated.
We could not.
In our dormitories and other buildings. And then sometimes we come across situations where everything is right, except it's not maintained. This picture is a classic example. Here you have a double exit door, a fire extinguisher, panic hardware, an exit sign that worked with emergency lighting. Everything was in place except the panic hardware was broken, so they took the door out of service with a wooden wedge. Please, folks, if your panic hardware breaks on a door, that should be one of the highest maintenance priorities on your campus to get it fixed and back in operation once again. Now, we talked about cooking. John alluded to the types of fires. It might be a small grease fire on a stove. It might be burnt popcorn. It might be an electrical short. But unsupervised cooking is the #1 cause of 84% of the residential fires that take place in dormitories or on campuses. And we just need to be aware of that is your #1 fire exposure. Now, John, what about these guys?
We see plenty of these. And in today's age where we have all kinds of electronic equipment brought in, computers and printers and students that want their own tiny little refrigerators and all kinds of things, we see more and more of the multi-plugs and octopus plugs that are plugged into walls. We see power strips that are overloaded and power strips that are plugged into power strips. And that's plugging a power strip into a power strip using extension cords for more than a temporary 90-day situation are code violations for the fire code. They can cause fires. They do cause fires. They have caused fires.
And I think the other thing that we must say is that many of our older dormitories or older residential sleeping areas have electrical circuits in them which were not
correct
anticipating the type of electrical load of today's electronic equipment that are usually found in those rooms. Now, John, I'm not a building engineer specialist. This is really your area, so, and these are your pictures on the screen. So tell us what we're looking at here.
Some of the most critical parts are, for one, maintaining adequate separation, especially in our mechanical rooms, so that our corridors are protected, so that it's protected from floor to floor. And what we see over and over and over again is that ceilings are cut out, that we have poke-throughs, that are holes drilled through to run computer wires or other electrical or plumbing, and those holes are not refilled with a fire-resistive material. So if you have a fire in that room, the smoke, fire products are all going to travel through that hole and go from floor to floor, hall to hall, room to room. And so more people get affected by the catastrophe that's evolving. These rooms need to be fire resistant, and we need to maintain that fire resistant structure. The other is that Oh, so far too many times we go in, electrical panels have been removed for work, and then they're not reinstalled. So you've got all of this, not only the hazard of the electrical wires and connections that are sticking out, but then also the metal compartments for electrical panels help to contain if something shorts out within that panel. If it's not closed, then it won't be contained.
Candles. I mean, kids love candles. Whether it's on a birthday cake, whether it's in the holiday decoration. I think the safest thing to say with candles is you should have an absolute no candles are allowed to be used policy in any of the sleeping rooms or dormitories within our facilities, because the open flame is just an invitation for a fire to happen. Now, John, these are probably some of the saddest pictures that we see. Here an organization has tried to provide smoke detectors in the sleeping areas, and then they've been compromised. Either they've been removed, or maybe the battery's been taken out, or maybe they've been broken through some type of horseplay and not replaced. As we do our self-inspections, not only do they need to be there, but they need to be in good working order, and they probably should be checked for their working condition at least a minimum of twice a year.
Yeah, they should indeed. You know, and a lot of times what we do is usually recommend that, of course, these things be checked by the dorm monitor, that they periodically check them. If nothing else, once a month at least, check off their list that those are okay. I mean, things like fire extinguishers are supposed to be checked for tampering and things on a monthly basis. It's obviously no reason why these can't also be checked. Also important that we maintain them properly, and if they are battery operated, that we change those batteries on a regular basis, like when the time changes.
Okay, our last picture. Irons, curling irons, blow dryers, common stuff in a lot of our dorm rooms, which also create a huge heat source if they are inadvertently left on top of bedding, on top of an ironing board, or fall into a stack of clothes. Another area, I know some of our older dormitories, in fact, have a no ironing within the room policy, where you have to go down to a designated ironing area. And it's just, again, a hazard that we all need to be aware of. Now, John, I see you're looking through the code book. How to help to give you some information as to how you can be better prepared. And as we come into the month of October, October 6th through 8th is Fire Prevention Week. And so we would encourage all organizations to take time during the upcoming weeks to really focus on fire safety and life safety within our facilities, to make sure that you have in place the appropriate steps, that you do the self-inspections of your life safety equipment, so that we can do our part to minimize any future loss of life or serious injury if a fire occurs in one of our facilities.
Right.
Well, David, I think that pretty well covers the topic from our end. And we want to thank you for the opportunity of sharing.
Yes, thank you.